Our next conversation is with Colorado's Democratic Attorney General Phil Weiser. Thanks for coming here straight from the flight back from Washington.
I'm happy to be here, Kyle.
It's been a long day. So this morning, Colorado's ban on conversion therapy was argued before the Supreme Court. How do you think it went?
We made our case, which is a pretty basic one. All medical science, all the organizations have looked at it, say conversion therapy is a discredited, harmful practice. Our point is you create a First Amendment right to do substandard medical care. That's a Pandora's box. And the court needs to think long and hard before opening it. Now, this court has shown us before they're willing to go far outside their headlights. They're not as sensitive around LGBTQ equality as I wish they were. So we're going to have to wait and see. What I can say is I'm proud of the argument we made, and I'm going to keep fighting for equal rights for all and to make sure that the LGBTQ community in Colorado knows that we've got their back.
It sounds an awful lot like you tend to agree with the legal observers who think you're going to lose. They're going to rule against you.
We knew going into this case that this Supreme Court, we just had this recently in a 303 creative case where it was about protecting civil rights protections. In that case, it was a similar type of Pandora's box. In that case, it's can you give someone a First Amendment right to discriminate against people because of who they love? And that could apply to other people, not to take photographs of women in the workforce. Here, you start saying, well, we're going to let someone give someone substandard medical care because they claim to have a First Amendment interest. Can you start telling people who have leukemia, kids, hey, just take some Tylenol. That'll take care of your leukemia. And they say, well, that's my First Amendment view. This is a dangerous game. It's always been clear. Substandard medical care is not something people get to do. And if the Supreme Court starts to create exemptions that allow it, that's dangerous.
So you referenced the 303 creative case. So this is now the third case in quick succession, very high-profile case that has involved Colorado issues of free speech, religious liberty, so forth, Masterpiece Cake, 303 creative, and now this case. And Colorado does not have a winning record in those cases. There are going to be people look and say Colorado is hostile to religious conservatives. Is the law in Colorado hostile to religious conservatives?
Not at all. Colorado's law has an exemption. If what you're engaged in is religious guidance, ministry, the law doesn't apply to you. The law applies to people who are professionals, who get a license from the state and who have an obligation to provide a standard of care that's legitimate. This is a harmful practice. There's a lot of evidence in the record that we put in how harmful this so-called conversion therapy is. The petitioner in this case, the therapist, there's no evidence showing it's helpful. This case is a made-up case without actual facts. There's never been enforcement against the therapist. The Supreme Court may reach to get to some result here, but it's, to my mind, a dangerous move because it's not grounded in facts, and it would open up this Pandora's box, allowing people to say, I'm going to practice whatever type of medicine I want because I've got some First Amendment interest in doing so.
So, I mean, you're not a legislator, you're a litigator, but do you see, based on what you heard from the court, that there would be a way for Colorado to achieve its aims through a slightly different methodology than what we currently have if they don't like the current setup?
We're going to work really hard to try to do that. The First Amendment doctrine, if they go that way, would be to say we've got to show under strict scrutiny, which is a demanding standard, that the regulation can be justified. If that's where the court lands, we're going to do our very best to justify as much protection as we can, because we know that LGBTQ youth are harmed by this practice. We want to make sure they're protected. We're going to do whatever we can to make that happen.
Also want to talk to you about what's happening right now with President Trump and the rule of law. Do you think that he is laying the groundwork to invoke the Insurrection Act and to put the U.S. military into American cities?
It sure looks that what he's doing is a level of military intervention into domestic law enforcement and federalizing the National Guard, which he's already tried to do now in Oregon and been rebuffed by the courts. He's now talking about doing it in Illinois. That's a very short step from calling in the military. And when he talked to the military recently, he made this statement, and people need to realize how radical a statement. He talked about the enemy within. He's talking about sending the military into our cities with no basis. In our whole nation's tradition, we were founded on a principle. The military does not do domestic law enforcement. To cross that line is a dangerous line. The judge in Portland who wrote that opinion was appointed by President Trump. And the opinion is a tour de force. It talked about the case to federalize the National Guard was untethered from reality, and it was dangerous. And this is what she said. We live in a society of constitutional law, not martial law.
And in response, President Trump said that if governors, mayors, or the courts are blocking him, that he'll look at the Insurrection Act, which is his pathway to have the military do domestic law enforcement. So my question is, do you think that that's the course that he's headed down?
It's possible, but that's going to beg another question, which is, will he legally get away with that move, or will the courts also check him on that move? And that gets to another important point. Ultimately, will the rule of law hold? Will he follow court orders? The American public, 80-20, say we expect our president to follow court orders and not to act above the law. We are heading towards moments of truth for our nation, moments that if we cross this line and a president says, I'm going to ignore the courts, we have lost the rule of law. That is why this moment is so important. That's why everyone needs to pay attention. That's why the work that I and other state AGs are doing is of the paramount importance. We cannot be afraid. We've got to hold the line.
How is this moment different than politics as usual, in which every president tries to stretch the bounds of presidential power to see their aims met? How is this different?
I'm going to give you 3 areas that's different, and they're different from the first Trump administration. I don't believe you can actually compare the first Trump administration and the second Trump administration. They're entirely different in these 3 ways. Freedom of speech. We saw an FCC chair push someone off the air in an unprecedented effort because of the content of what was being said. That's core censorship. Second, weaponizing law enforcement. We've seen cases either dropped for friends, Eric Adams, or pushed against enemies, Jim Comey, maybe Tish James, in ways that are appalling. And what we've seen in all these cases, the law enforcement cases, is people quitting, saying, I won't be any part of this. Those are heroes, whistleblowers. Those are warning signs. And finally, this step with the military, our founders were afraid of this step. They knew that the military in cities would chill people's exercise of their rights, would leave people feeling occupied. That's exactly what this republic was founded on not happening. It cannot happen lightly. There's no basis in law or in on-the-ground facts for doing it. We all need to speak loud and clear, and that's the one constraint we need. Public opinion has got to say we can't cross this line, not in America.
That said, people go into the streets to protest, and there are inevitably going to be tension points between federal officers and those protesters. And then President Trump has used those moments of altercations in the streets, even isolated, as then the predicate to send in more troops and so forth. What is your message to Coloradans who want to protest what ICE is doing in our community and who would want to protest if troops are ever sent here? What do you say to them?
Show up at the No Kings rally on October 18th at the Capitol. As many people as possible, and be as peaceful as possible. When people say no kings, they're talking about 1776. They're talking about our Declaration of Independence, which commits to the rule of law, commits to freedom of speech, and says no to military essentially occupying local cities and communities. Show up peacefully. We need to make sure we both use our voice. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to show up. But also, we've got to be peaceful. It's going to be a challenge because your point is right. If people do engage in provocative conduct, you're playing into the argument that there is some type of emergency. What's important to note about Portland, a judge appointed by President Trump looked at the facts and said there was no good faith basis for action. We cannot give any good faith basis for sending people in. We need to give a showing of clear support for our republic and a stand against no kings.
Want to go back to something that you said. You originally said as peaceful as possible, and then after that you said it needs to be peaceful, it needs to be peaceful. Is there any scenario in which you think that non-peaceful reactions to ICE in the streets or to federal law enforcement is warranted?
No, this is very important.
Okay.
If you see ICE, you need to take out your phone and you can capture what's happening. That's a First Amendment right. But do not engage. Do not escalate. It's really important. If we can keep calm, be peaceful, and be orderly, we are going to continue to keep the rule of law in our republic. Your point is right. If people do escalate, if people engage in any illegal activity or violence, you're playing into the hands of claiming there's some type of crisis.
A claim that has been made by the Trump administration in Chicago is that local law enforcement has failed to come to the aid of ICE officers who have been confronted by the public and who feel like they're in danger. Can Colorado law enforcement come to the aid of federal immigration agents without running afoul of state law that limits their cooperation?
Yes, this is very important. If someone is doing anything that is hostile, harmful to ICE, that's a crime. That is against the law, and that person needs to be held accountable, and Colorado law enforcement will do its job of enforcing the law. What Colorado law enforcement can't do is actively engage in immigration enforcement. That's ICE's job, but when it comes to enforcing Colorado law, which means protecting all people and property, that's what law enforcement's there for. We're doing that work. We can do that work. We don't need federal help.
Various Democratic leaders around the country have used various words to describe what we're seeing. California Governor Gavin Newsom has said that we're approaching martial law. J.B. Pritzker, governor of Illinois, has talked about creeping authoritarianism. Some Democrats have even referred to what we're seeing as steps towards fascism. What terminology do you use to describe what we're seeing?
Threats to the foundation of our democratic republic. When you think about our democratic republic, there are three pillars that hold it: freedom of speech, rule of law enforced fairly, and finally, the military not showing up in our communities. If those three pillars are undermined, we lose our democratic republic. We're seeing threats to those pillars. They're still holding, but they're shaky right now. We need people to hold them up, to stand for them, and to use their voice.
Last question. How many lawsuits do you currently have against the Trump administration?
37 and counting.
I'm sure people who like you and like your politics love that. People who don't like you and don't like your politics think that that's grandstanding. So here's my question. What is the fairest way for Coloradans to evaluate whether all the lawsuits that you're bringing against the Trump administration are political posturing or are good faith protections of Coloradans? How should they evaluate it?
One thing I would recommend to everybody, you can read our lawsuits for yourself. What's important about the way our legal system works is we do it in public. Every single case I bring, there's a complaint. Read it, see whether it makes sense to you. And then you'll see what an independent judge rules, like this judge in Portland, who was appointed by Donald Trump. In that case, we're an amicus, if you will. We're on the side of the Oregon AG. It's not our case. But when I file a case against the terrorists, for example, in the first court that heard it, there was a judge appointed by President Trump. That judge agreed with us. It went to the federal circuit. We won there as well. There's a scorecard that's been put out about the lawsuits we're bringing. Take a look at all of them. And if anyone says, I don't agree with you on this lawsuit or that lawsuit, let us know. I'm always open to input. I don't want to have to bring these lawsuits. In the first Trump administration, I only brought 11 in my whole 2 years, and some of those were cases filed before I got there. I'm now up to 37, and we're not even 9 months in. This is a different administration. It is consistently lawless. It's just trying to see whatever they can do, ignoring the law. A lot of times we bring these cases, and then lawyers actually get involved and say there's no leg to stand on, and they walk away.
Attorney General Phil Weiser, thank you for making time at the end of a long day.
Happy to do it.